Shabbat Shalom. Excuse me. If you want to turn there, we're going to be looking at get this, Deuteronomy 3. Deuteronomy just means the fifth book. In Greek terminology, it's Devarim in Hebrew, which is the word speaking. And I'm going to read probably not all of this passage, but we're going to certainly read the first 6 verses. It's a theme that keeps coming up as you talk about the children of Israel going into the land. And one thing I would just like to remind you, and Greg kind of set us up for this. When you read the Word, it's informative, it's historical. There are a lot of things you can learn. But the number one reason we read it is to see ourselves. The number one reason we read it is, what is God saying to me out of this passage? And so, both Paul and the writer of Hebrews, which could be the same person, allude to this, and the other writers in the New Testament do, but those two come out clearly and say that these were examples, these are pictures of how God works with people. And so, as we begin this story, I think it's good to say, does this have any application to my life? Is this meaningful? And I was listening to the radio to one of the preachers on K-Truth, and I can't remember which one it was, but he talked about the fact that at the first of the year, a lot of Christians make a New Year's resolution that they're going to read through the Bible. And he says usually they get through Genesis and Exodus and run aground in Leviticus. And I kind of laughed, but the reason we do that is we can't figure out what the relevance is to us. What does it mean? So in verse 1, then we turned and went up the road to Bashan, and Og, probably in Hebrew it's Og, king of Bashan with all his people came out to meet us in battle at Edrei. But Yahweh said to me, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you shall do to him just as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon. So Yahweh our God delivered Og also, king of Bashan, with all his people into our hand, and we smote them until no survivor was left. We captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled towns. We utterly destroyed them, as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But all the animals and the spoil of the cities we took as our booty. That's an unfortunate translation. I would use another word. You know, it's funny how words change. I hadn't even noticed that when I read through it, but reading it out loud, I'm like, was there another? I was going to say, booty? Anyway, what's the word I'm looking for? What? Spoils? What'd you say? Loot. Yeah, loot. Plunder. That's all those words, or anyway, booty hits my funny bone. Okay. Anyway, it goes on to talk about how powerful Og is, and that talks about the division of the 2.5 tribes that are left, and that's a whole subject itself, because this chapter you could talk about the fact that God gives us missions, and it's kind of like looking into the Word. One of the worst things we do as believers is look at someone else and think we should do what they're doing. Now, the way they're doing it, we could learn from. But, you know, even this chapter ends with Moses being told by God he's not going into the land, but he has prepared 2 million other people who will. and that he's to put everything behind Joshua and let him go in. It's another story, but it's an important story. And these 2.5 tribes, they are going to get settled, but then they're going to go ahead of the rest of Israel and help them conquer the land. And this concept of conquering the land is very important and has been misused throughout history. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to drop down to verse 18. Then I commanded you at that time, saying, this would be Moses, Yahweh your God has given you this land to possess it. All you valiant men shall cross over armed before your brothers, the sons of Israel. But this is speaking to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. But your wives and your little ones and your livestock, I know you have much livestock, shall remain in your cities which I have given you, until Yahweh gives rest to your fellow countrymen as to you. And they also possess the land which Yahweh your God will give them beyond the Jordan. Then you may return every man to his possession which I have given you. I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that Yahweh your God has done to these 2 kings. So Yahweh shall do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for Yahweh your God is the one fighting for you. So this is a consistent theme. We've seen it before. And that is, when you go into the land, you destroy every person. You leave nothing. And so, how does that speak to you and me? What's the value of it? How many of you are aware that in the conquest of the country we stand on, this concept was misused? You ever heard of manifest destiny? And this is, for you and me, what's the most obvious interpretation of what the land is? I agree with Betsy. Yourself. You. Now, certainly it has corporate meaning, but it's telling you and telling me that there are things that I can allow outside of me that I cannot allow inside of me. There's no way, and we've talked about this medically speaking, you can have bacteria all over your skin. In fact, it's good for you to have some. It's good to have bacteria in your intestine, because your intestine, to an anatomist, is outside of you. I know that will seem strange to you, but it has a hole in and a hole out, and it's completely intact. Things can go through the barrier, but your intestine is outside of you. You're out your GI tract. The things I can put into my mouth, I cannot inject into me. Because there are things I can't do that with. Just as I think we all understand that in a human being, we're constantly forming abnormal cells. We make tumors. But a healthy immune system recognizes them, destroys them. Because how much cancer tissue can I have inside of me and be healthy? 0. 0. When the doctor is treating me or you for cancer, his or her goal is to destroy it, eradicate it. They don't care that it's alive. They don't care that it's part of you. They want to destroy it because it will kill you. You can't have any. And as we talk about these passages, see, the whites that came into this land, and they mostly were, decided, and not all of them, that the natives here were just like the Canaanites, and that they should be destroyed. And you know, there were some elements of Indian practice and religion that was quite bad. But there's a tremendous amount of it that isn't. There's a tremendous amount of it that sounds like Christianity. But we just didn't pay attention to that. And how many of you remember what the Bible teaches us about making treaties and breaking them? Joshua made a treaty with the Gibeonites. Was it on the truth or false pretenses? Was Israel bound to that? They were bound to that treaty forever. How many of you know we made treaties with Native Americans with the intent to break them? Because it was with them. And I just point this out as we look at this today. Be careful how you apply Scripture. And the first thing to do is what Greg was admonishing us this morning. It's a mirror. See yourself in it. It's very dangerous to read the Bible and go, you know, if Kaya would really listen to this, or Gerald would, it would really help them. When I'm doing that, what am I doing about myself? I'm avoiding the issue. I'm not taking care of it. So we're going to start with that. Israel, I'll ask you a question, I think you all know the answer. Did Israel destroy all of the enemies in the land? How did that work? Judges 2. Now the angel of Yahweh came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of Yahweh spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So they named that place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to Yahweh. And it goes on in that chapter to talk about the fact that the people left in the land would test them. And do we have parallels to this in the New Testament? How many of you have ever really read the words of Yeshua and read it for you? Do what Greg was saying this morning. Don't read this about Dave or Kai or Greg. Read it about John. You have heard it said, Matthew 5, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's a rough statement. Though I have to straighten this out with people. I think you all understand that temptation is far different than the decision to sin. In fact, there's nothing wrong with temptation. The scriptures say that Yeshua was tempted every way that we are. But the danger with temptation is taking it in. It's Martin Luther's, and I don't know if he said this, but I like the fact that I heard he did. He said, you can't stop the birds from flying overhead, but you can stop them from making a nest in your hair. And he said this right after a bird had bombed him, which made me laugh, because sometimes that happens. You can't stop that. So Yeshua says, if you look at her with lust, if there's really a desire to do that, he said, there's something in you. And so what did he say we should do about it? I'll bet everybody here, what did he say we should do about it? If I look at something, NIV says to gouge. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. Doesn't that sound a little like Deuteronomy 3? My first reaction is, ooh. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. What's Yeshua saying here? Does he really want me to gouge my eye out?
Some people take that literally.
Yeah?
In a lot of religion, which completely
Yeah, I mean, there's another one I could talk about that Origen did, but, well, just let's put it this way. Yeshua made a comment that some men are eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom, so Origen did this to himself. Yeah. Hebrews 12, and I'll bet you know this one too. I love Hebrews 12 is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. It's the one that starts out that for the joy set before him, Yeshua endured the cross. But then it has this statement. You have not yet resisted to the point of what? Shedding your blood. What does that mean? In my struggle against sin, how many have ever noticed that it's so much easier to deal with the other guy's sin than yours? My sin is kind of okay. I mean, it's not really hurting anybody. It's, my sin, you have to understand, it's kind of a problem, but your sin, you need to take care of that.
As you're saying, if you gouge out your eye or cut off your hand or your arm or whatever, I mean, that's pretty graphic. And I was thinking about this one day, and I think the Spirit just spoke to me. I said, I want you to deal as ruthlessly, be in a position to deal as ruthlessly and without any thinking about what you see in your life is contrary to my will. And when you do that, when you're just going to say, that thing is going to die within me by God's grace, then it will happen.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems that we have, at least if I speak for myself, is that very often the sin inside of me, I figured out a way to make a place for it. And I think what Yeshua is saying, and what Deuteronomy is saying, is you got to destroy it. See, even, and in real terms, the thoughts of killing little children just turns my stomach. But that's not what that is about to you. It's a historical fact. But what's the problem with those little children? They grow up to be adults that teach the Israelites to be idolaters. So the lesson to me is, what are the little things that I let inside? See, this Hebrews 12, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. And, those are not really pleasant in some ways to me. And yet I understand in my life, my parents disciplined me, and it was good for me. But what I also realize is I can handle the discipline of my parents because I felt safe with them. I knew they weren't trying to get rid of me. They weren't trying to destroy me. They loved me. And so I could handle it. See, if discipline ever feels like punishment, we get confused here. You don't punish people to discipline them. You punish them to hurt them. We should not use that word with discipline. I think sometimes we do, and it's probably okay, but the idea of punish is to injure. And I was thinking about this, and I think in our own country we've had multiple examples where we decided we weren't going to destroy everything. And the classic one is slavery. In the Constitutional Convention, what was the big issue that they struggled with to get everybody to sign it? It was slavery. And so they finally had to sign that document and leave something in it that didn't utterly condemn slavery. Otherwise, not everybody would sign. How did it work for us to keep that in our bosom, so to speak? It grew up and brought bad fruit. Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, they agreed because they agreed not to discuss the slave trade.
Yeah,
They hoped, a lot of people hoped, because it was dying out, that it was gone.
Teresa's right. They were hoping if we ignore it, it'll go away. Isn't that what the children of Israel did? They went into the land and they said, well, we're going to skip these. We're not going to get rid of those. Out of the 53 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, 55 delegates, 25 of them owned slaves. Why am I bringing this out? Because if I'm struggling with an area in my life, I am not a responsible person to make a decision about how to handle it. I'm just not. It's like you said earlier, Margot, I have an agenda. I'm going to protect myself. And how many of you read the book Gone with the Wind? How many of you noticed when you got done with that book, it evoked a nostalgia for the Old South and for the goodness of slavery? That was the purpose of the book. If you couldn't figure that out, people know how to mess with you. Well, I'm just telling you, there was an agenda in the book. It's a well-written book, and the way it ended, I could kill the author. I can still remember I was 16 or 17, and I'm like, you can't do this to me! But I mean, seriously, the book is playing with emotions, and I have to leave a little early today. I want to bring something up because I know it's true for me. Be careful, because your body and Satan can make sin look attractive. He'll show you everything that's good about it. And it'll make you want to cling to it. And Yeah, I wrote some things down here. John Rutledge made this comment. Religion and humanity have nothing to do with this question, the question of slavery. Unless the regulation of the slave trade is left to the states, the southernmost states will not be parties to the Union. That's a quote. He said, "This we're going to keep doing this." And here's another thing I'll mention about slavery. When they started slavery, which, I mean, they didn't start, it's been going on a long time, but even at the time of the Constitutional Convention, many of the slave owners felt bad about slavery. They knew it was a bad thing. By the time of the Civil War, many of the slave states were saying it's a positive good. Did you know you have an issue in the country today that has done this? It has gone there, and I wasn't even aware how far it had gone. And because we're, not all of us, but we're getting embarrassed to speak out, we have now allowed another cancer into the bosom, into the belly of America that's going to cause death. It's going to be destruction. And that is the issue of abortion. There's a movie out right now about a guy named Gosnell. I don't know if I can stand to see it, but I think you probably should see it. It's produced by an Irish filmmaker who is definitely pro-life. That isn't the issue that I really want people to see. It's that when we decided that a woman has a choice, that's a seed. What fruit does that seed bear? And I wasn't even aware of this because I know a lot of wonderful pro-choice people. I do. I just do. But his clinic was run terribly bad. He wasn't even a gynecologist or an obstetrician. It was dirty. They found cats in there. They found cat feces, urine. But here's the thing. He has now been sent to jail. He was convicted for homicide for 3 babies that they could have witnesses and proof that the babies were born alive, and he took scissors and severed their spinal cord. And they asked him, because in Pennsylvania, the procedure is legal as long as the fetus has not advanced to this arbitrary stage of development. So they asked him, who can decide if the fetus is too advanced to abort? He says, I do. In that clinic, it wasn't rare. It didn't just happen 3 times. The sounds of babies crying were in an abortion clinic. How can you do this? How can you allow this to happen? How can you even begin to say it's good? But we are. We are saying this is good. If you don't believe me, I'm going to read you a story, and promise me you won't get too. Adam Mill wrote an article. It was an interesting article. He said he watched this movie and he said, I have left my agnosticism on the issue of abortion. My Abortion, My Son, by Elizabeth. My son's birth story begins with an abortion. After working in reproductive and sexual health care for over 5 years, I was a walking contraception encyclopedia. But after trying almost every form of birth control on the market, I knew that the more effective forms of hormonal birth control were not for me. I had successfully evaded pregnancy with a combination of condoms, and this is very graphic, but you're all grown-ups. Condoms, withdrawal, fertility awareness. However, a whim of passion and attraction had overpowered those methods, and with just one mistake, I was pregnant. I want you to stop for a second and think of something. We're talking about a human being, and the first way we describe that human being is a mistake. I knew I was pregnant within days of conceiving. First I became lightheaded, had recurring dreams that I had a daughter. Then she starts talking about her body, which gets a little too personal for me, and she was nauseous, which is very common. She went and got a dollar store pregnancy test, and sure enough, she was pregnant. My boyfriend was torn in his own life. Pregnancy had always been celebrated and welcomed as a gift. He felt that love was the only necessary condition for parenting. I sat on the opposite side of our decision-making spectrum. I was on the verge of completing an expensive graduate program, modestly employed by my local Planned Parenthood, and barely making ends meet. But truly, my resolve was based on a certainty far deeper than logic. There was not a single doubt in my mind that my pregnancy was due to be aborted. I loved my boyfriend, but when I searched my heart, there was no love for the new life inside me. Those words just... It's frightening what happens when we take something in, when we leave the little children of the Canaanites in the land. See, you and I aren't aware of this. I had no idea. I found this story on a site called Shout Out Your Abortion. Don't go there unless you want to be nauseated. For years I had been a dedicated abortion activist. Beyond pro-choice, I felt that abortion was an ancient remedy to a typical condition among women. I considered myself pro-abortion, knowing firsthand that it helped women. To me it was simple. Some pregnancies became babies, and some did not. In my life and in my profession, I was committed to helping women who did not want babies obtain self-abortions from skilled, compassionate providers. While I agreed with many of my colleagues that sharing stories was a necessary part of normalizing a common procedure, I also knew from working with patients that not every woman is equipped or ready to speak out. Of course, I often mused, if I ever had an abortion, I would shout it from a mountaintop. My real life put my words in their place. Aside from a few good friends, I told no one. To be clear, I was not ashamed of my abortion, but once I was experiencing the pregnancy and process, sharing that story felt too complicated. For example, I became pregnant just 2 months after my sister announced that she was pregnant and planning to have her first child, and just 1 month before my brother planned to marry. Prior to my surprise pregnancy, I had relied on the support of my parents and siblings for every dilemma under the sun, including a decade-long, all-consuming eating disorder and the trauma of living just blocks from the World Trade Center during 9/11. As topics of conversation focused on my brother's wedding and my sister's pregnancy, I saw my crisis as an opportunity to remain stoic and allow my family the chance to enjoy a few milestones without worrying about me for a change. I hope you can just hear a thread of weirdness here. Staying silent was never easy. I still recall sobbing on my kitchen floor the night before my abortion. Why? It's a good thing. It's what she wants to do. It's a woman's right. I had opted to have a surgical abortion, but that entailed waiting until I was 6 weeks pregnant. In the meantime, I entertained several self-abortive strategies from acupuncture to yoga, herbs to diet, meditation to exercise. Yet the pregnancy persisted beyond every attempt, and my symptoms swelled. In the days leading up to my abortion, I developed a particular respect for my pregnancy's unwavering capacity to overwhelm me, and even began to wonder if I was stopping something meant to last. I almost threw up when I read this. I'm taking a minute for it to step in because this isn't the only area this happens. What is happening to the ability of people in the world today because of how we handle the scripture that Greg talked about? We no longer can discern what's right and wrong because we've decided we know and God doesn't. We can't trust God. God's decisions on right and wrong are not trustworthy. They're not good for people. And so we've taken it over, and how are we doing? As I sobbed on my kitchen floor, I longed to hear my mom's voice. I was keenly aware that her support would instantly diminish my questions. Still, my desire to spare her my misery prevailed. I had the abortion on a Saturday. I took the day off from work and traveled to a sister clinic on my own. My boyfriend and a number of good friends asked to accompany me, but I decided to go alone so I could focus on myself. It was simple and painful, yet bearable. Uneventful procedure, the doctor noted. The months that followed solidified my decision in ways that the days prior to my abortion could not. I completed my graduate program, I enjoyed my brother's wedding, and marveled at my sister's growing belly while feeling no comparative regret over my pregnancy loss. My boyfriend and I moved in together, but it was not that simple. Despite my own resolve, I continued to wonder. I felt that I had invited a certain level of destruction into my life. My once perfect cycle was erratic and unpredictable. In addition, it seemed there was a lingering spiritual hurdle I was struggling to overcome. I left my job at Planned Parenthood. Despite going into serious debt to obtain my graduate degree, I still had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I broke my foot after falling over a footbridge on my bike. The feeling of catastrophe persisted until my boyfriend and I went camping in the middle of nowhere just 4 months after my abortion. And this is graphic, I admit it. We soaked in a spring on the side of the mountain and made love under the stars. Quietly, I wished to be pregnant. And I knew within hours that my son was on his way. He was born on a Saturday. Did you catch what happened on Saturday before? For several years, I have fallen into a rhythm of full-time caregiving that has often felt at odds with my former radical self. While I know that abortion is a beautiful, even triumphant fact of life, I have felt indifferent to the brilliant movements that have risen in the wake of my son's birth. Having lived in one liberal community after another, I have been telling myself, knowing deep down that I am misguided, that we live in a post-anti-abortion world. Sex is everywhere. Abortion is a fact of life. Everyone knows this. Recently, I moved to Ohio so my son could live closer to family. This past December, the governor signed a 20-week abortion ban. How dare he, I questioned. How dare I stop fighting for my rights, I realized. The time for my comfortable silence has passed. I no longer live in the mountains, but I am ready to shout my abortion from this standpoint. I no longer wish to keep this wonderful secret. My abortion gave birth to my child. This is gross. If you go on this website, Shout Out Your Abortion, you'll find hundreds, maybe thousands of stories like this that you keep hearing the truth trying to leak out, but they keep maintaining how good this is. And this happened last night. Last night in LA, there was an evening of abortion-related comedy to celebrate the release of Shout Your Abortion's first book. Abortion is normal, necessary, and we're allowed to talk about it however we want. This show features performances by Danielle Radford, Tashi Condolly, Amy Brenneman, Danielle Perez, Sarah, bunch of names. It's hosted by Margaret Katch and Roni Jiva. Shout up, stand up for Shout Your Abortion is proof that abortion stories are every bit as human as we are, and sometimes they're hilarious. As I was listening to this fellow recount the testimony in this Dr. Gosnell's case, where the jury wanted to know how do they typically handle babies born alive, and other clinics admitted they don't cut their spinal cords. They make them warm and comfortable and set them over to die of dehydration. I couldn't stand it. I mean, you can tell, I just felt like throwing up. It was sick. And the thing that bothered me, it's legal. And what's more, the baby born at 24 weeks that I want is valuable. The baby born at 24 weeks that I don't want can die. The fact that it's alive, that it's moving, that it's crying, doesn't matter. And then you say, how did we get to this place? And I'll tell you how. Because we didn't kill the little children. We didn't stamp out everything of the lie. And it's given me renewed resolve, because there are areas in my life where I've gone, really, is this what's right and wrong, Lord? And I'm so grateful that our God is not a condemning God, that He's a forgiving God, that He's a restoring God. But you can only be restored if you admit that where you've been is a bad place. My mom quoted this to me, and I'm sure you've all heard it before. Vice is a monster of so frightful mien as to be hated needs but but to be seen, yet seen too oft, familiar with her face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. And this is what happened with slavery, it's what's happened with abortion, it's happening with some other things. I see the transgender thing that's going on right now in our country, and I do not hate people with gender dysphoria. It's a rough place to be. It's tough. But we have a clinic in San Francisco that is doing mastectomies on 13-year-olds. That's repulsive. Do you know in veterinary medicine we only have 2 genders? In human we're now up to 9 or 10. And it's based on what you feel. How many of you know what I feel is not reliable? There are some days my feelings are not the truth. Do we stop loving people? Do we stop accepting people? Of course not. It's time to listen to people. What is going on? What's the damage? What's the pathology in their lives? But there's pathology because of disobedience, not because we didn't follow feelings. I think Greg and I were talking about this just the other day, that Debbie Boone song. It can't be wrong when it feels so right. Anybody remember that song? You Light Up My Life? Those are the words, aren't they? I don't want to leave this on a negative note. I'm convinced that God knows what He's talking about. That when He says, John, don't do this, it's bad for you. That He's right. I can believe Him. And what I would like to have is the Holy Spirit's unflinching resolve to follow Yeshua, to be like Jesus. I wish I didn't believe this, but I have never seen a situation where evil is taken into the heart of the home, taken internally to the people, that to resolve the problem didn't require bloodshed. I pray that something can happen to America to wake us up to what we're doing with abortion and any of these things where we're tricking ourselves. And we're saying, God can't be right. Why are you following those old myths? And yet, every time we, quote, stop following the old myths, what happens? What's the harvest we're getting from it? And I don't know about you, but I flat out could not believe what's happening with babies. I mean, we now can save babies that are born at 24 weeks, quite reliably. How much did you weigh, Cecilia, when you were born? About less than 2 pounds. It looks to me like it worked out all right. But here's the thing. Every human being is such a beautiful creation of God with so much infinite creativity and joy that they bring to life. When we find people, quote, with unwanted pregnancies, God's people have got to be there to bless, to support, and if they can't take care of the baby, we need to. The baby does not deserve to die because it's inconvenient to us. It's like those that say, well, we can't ban slavery because if we do, what will happen to all those poor slaves? They can't take care of themselves. They're better off slaves. But I'm reading this person saying, I can't figure out why this pregnancy is trying to hang on to me so much. We talk a lot about, and Greg has mentioned this over and over, where Yeshua says, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. The truth is so many things. Truth is facts. But in terms of what I know as truth, in terms of how God has revealed Himself to me, this is truth. I've accepted this as the truth. I've put my life on it. Do I always hold up the banner in my life? No. But my desire is that I'll see myself and ask for that restoring love to be there. You know, in my own life, there are so many times where I've seen me and my bent to go the wrong way, and that loving grace of God that's kept me in His way. And, you know, I need to close today because we need to go. But, you know, I agree that all the ways of the Lord are right. and righteous altogether. That the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. And the statutes of the Lord are altogether wonderful. And I believe that God's people, when they're founded there, they will find the grace, the goodness, and the mercy of God overflowing where we choose to follow him. Let's all stand. Gerald, would you close for us, please?
Father, we are grateful to be able to gather here today before you. We recognize that it is your desire that we become like you. As both Greg and John said, it's incumbent upon us to look into your word to us, your instructions, because you've given us the way to life. Especially through Yeshua, you've made it possible for us to be in your presence. So we thank you for your blessings. We do ask for each one of us that your Holy Spirit would work within us, to open our eyes, to shine lights on the paths that we should take, and to give us understanding of the enemies that need to be addressed within our own selves. So we just thank you again for this day, this opportunity for our fellowship with you in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah.
Amen. I'm a little early, so I don't know what you want them to do.